A black woman, a neat suit, a quiet sidewalk, and then a white cop walks up handcuffs in hand. No warning, no reason, just a look of prejudice and a bad decision. But what the cop doesn't know is that the woman he's about to insult is the mayor of the city. From a peaceful night to a national spotlight. From a punch to the cheek to the trigger that turns the system upside down. The story you're about to hear is more than just a wrongful arrest. It's an indictment of a system that has long been silent when innocent people are marginalized simply because of the color of their skin. And that woman, she didn't back down. She stood up, and the city stood up with her. If you've ever wondered, can one person change anything? Then here is the answer. Like, subscribe, and join me in a story that will make you angry and hopeful at the same time. Because justice is not a dream. The night view of Rose Hill has an old-fashioned beauty, almost as it has been since the 1960s. The yellow streetlights cast a glow over the red brick buildings where the hand-painted letters have faded over the years. There are no car horns, no music from the bars, only the wind rustling through the old eucalyptus trees along the street, and the soft sound of Celia Monroe's clogs echoing on the ancient tiles. No one knows that it is her light footsteps that bring the whole city closer to a moment of looking in the mirror. She stood there alone in front of Whitaker's Book Emporium, a place she loved since her days as a young professor, where rare editions of James Baldwin, Maya Angelou, and Toni Morrison were printed. In the pale reflection of the glass, Celia saw herself 58 years old, with silver hair, a long ivory wool coat, a silk scarf tied loosely around her neck, gloves on her hands. No longer the young activist storming the courtroom, but a grown woman, quiet with the composure of a survivor. She had no badge, no bodyguard. She didn't want to draw attention. She just stood there, waiting for her assistant Andre to bring her a signed memoir that she planned to donate to a high school library. A small gift, a peaceful gesture. But even the most ordinary thing for a black woman in a southern town could be misread as something suspicious. A third check of her phone, still no messages. Andre must have been stuck in the traffic from the main road into downtown. Celia didn't mind. After nearly 40 years as a lawyer, and more than a decade of fighting in city halls, she had learned that patience wasn't just a virtue, it was a weapon. But tonight something was different. Footsteps. Not hurried, but purposeful. From across the street. Not the sound of a late commuter or a college student returning home from work. These were the footsteps of someone who carried power and was accustomed to using it as an excuse. She didn't need to turn around to know. Then the voice spoke rough and deliberate. "What are you doing here?" Celia turned slowly. A white police officer in his early 40s walked toward her. His uniform was neat, one hand on his belt next to his gun. His eyes held not suspicion but prejudice wrapped in a doing his duty mantle. His name she would learn later. Gregory Mason. "I'm waiting for someone," she said softly, unafraid, but also unyielding. "I'm delivering the book tonight. I'm standing in front of the store." "So late?" He raised an eyebrow. "Outside a closed store." By appointment, she nodded. "I'm not disturbing the peace. Do you have identification?" Celia tilted her head. The question was familiar, not because she looked suspicious, but because she was black. Well-dressed, standing still. For many cops, that was enough. "There's no reason to check me," she said. "I'm standing on a public sidewalk." It wasn't defiance. It was understanding. But for people like Mason, understanding was a kind of hidden crime. He took another step, the distance between them now only a few inches. "The way you stand here dressed like that, you don't look like a local. You look trying to look important." The words needed no explanation. They went through like a rusty knife. Celia didn't raise an eyebrow, didn't respond with an insult. She'd heard versions of the phrase since her days on the back of the segregated bus, But even though she knew, even though she expected it, the cut still stung as much as the first time. I wasn't loitering. I wasn't in the way she said. I was just waiting for someone. That sounds like an excuse, the cop said, his hand now resting on the flashlight, not for illumination, but for symbolism. As a warning, and then the words she'd heard all her life spoken again in a flat, cold voice. You don't belong here. The truth was, she belonged here more than anyone. She was the one who'd convinced the board to invest in the public schools, the one who'd lobbied to improve the local hospital, the one who'd sat in hearings to defend the rights of both the poor and the good cops. But tonight, just by standing still on the sidewalk, she was back where society had once placed her, the silent suspect in the wrong place at the wrong time, with the wrong skin color. Celia took a deep breath, her eyes locked on the man holding the belt. You're crossing the line. You refuse to cooperate, Mason asked, as if it had been programmed. I refuse to be humiliated. Mason said nothing more. Another step, and his hand was on her wrist, squeezing. The next 7 seconds passed. A painful twist, a shove against the bare brick wall, and then cold handcuffs clamped around the wrists of the woman who had won the State Civil Rights Award. No one screamed. No one stopped. The city remained silent. But inside her, an earthquake occurred. Not from physical pain, but from the realization all her degrees, her titles, her contributions had vanished in a moment when someone refused to see her as a human being. Celia Munro did not cry, she did not whimper, but at the corner of her mouth blood trickled a warning. You have just hit something bigger than me, and it will not be silent. Time sometimes doesn't pass, it freezes. In the next few seconds, Celia Munro was pulled away from the wall like a criminal. Her knees hit the rough tile, her gloves fell off, her bare hands hit the cold ground. She managed to keep herself from falling completely, but her head was still reeling from Officer Mason's punch. A punch she hadn't seen coming, but should have guessed from the look in his eyes. It wasn't the look of a man on duty. It was the look of a man enjoying the power in his hands. No one intervened. Not a word. Only the hum of a radio from a police car parked a few meters away, as if everything had been set up and running according to the orbit the system was so familiar with. But he didn't know one thing. The man he had just hit was the mayor. Celia lay on her side, gasping for air, her lips bloody, her wrists pulled back, aching. She felt the humiliation welling up not just from the assault, but from the powerlessness that black women had known for centuries. People like her, doctors, mayors, community icons, could be crushed by the heavy gaze of a man in uniform. As the policeman pushed her to the curb, he said almost triumphantly, "Next time remember who's in charge." Celia looked up. Her face was smeared with blood under the streetlights, but her eyes were still bright. Not from a sudden outburst of anger, but from a smoldering, unquenchable fire. She said softly, "Before you put me in the car, why didn't you check my papers?" He frowned. "What papers?" Celia said, not raising her voice, not rushing. "You wanted to see it so badly when I said no. Now I'll show it to you." The officer frowned. He leaned forward, reaching into Celia's coat pocket. The action was suddenly awkward. His hand flipped through the brown leather wallet, and then he pulled out a stiff card on the front of which was a picture of Celia dressed in navy blue, looking straight ahead, and the words printed clearly, "Mayor of Rosehill, Dr. Celia Munro." First there was a slight frown, then confusion, then panic. The officer's face was white. He swallowed. The hand holding the card trembled. "Ma'am, I don't know." Celia interrupted with a dry laugh. "Not happy, not angry, but bitter. Of course you don't know," she whispered. "Because you never cared." The officer stepped back as if the card in his hand had become hot. He turned to look at the two passers-by who had stopped earlier. They said nothing, but their phones were already raised, their eyes were glued to the screen. The camera was recording. Celia was still on her knees. She looked straight at him, her expression no longer tense, but strangely quiet. The kind of quiet that comes from people who know they don't need to scream to be heard because they are living proof. You just hit an elderly woman, a non-resisting person, a citizen of status, and the head of this city. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but no words came out. His lips moved meaninglessly, like the system he represented at this moment was floundering in the light of truth. "Unhandle me," Celia said, not asking but commanding. With trembling fingers, Mason inserted the key into the lock. There was a snap. Not loud, but to Celia, it was the sound of a rage being unlocked. She stood slowly, without staggering, without help. She straightened her coat, wiped her lips with a handkerchief. There was a defiant dignity to her every move, as if she were no longer the victim, but had returned to the role of forcing the system to confront itself. "Madam, I really don't know." "It's not that you don't know," Celia said, her eyes never leaving him. "It's that you don't want to know. And that's the scariest thing." The small crowd of a dozen people had grown. Some were filming, some were live streaming, and everyone knew this moment would not be hidden. Celia took a step forward. The officer instinctively backed away. "You didn't just hit me," she said. "You hit a city, a community, a memory." Then she turned and walked away, leaving the man standing there, pale, sweating, despite the cool air. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to call a lawyer. She didn't need to warn. She was a lawyer, a politician, a living testament to resilience. As she walked, people moved aside. No one stopped her. No one asked. No one pitied her. There was only quiet respect. An old woman in the crowd, silver hair, Africa headscarf, touched Celia's arm as she passed. Her voice was as soft as the wind. "God bless you, go, and do what no one else dares." Celia nodded. She didn't answer, but in her eyes at that moment there was a different light. Not anger, but absolute determination. When she pulled out her phone and called Andre, her voice was low but firm. "Andre, I've been assaulted." "No, don't say anything. Meet me at the town hall now." She hung up, put the phone away, and then the wind began to pick up. It was as if Rosehill were preparing for a storm, not of nature, but of truths that had been hidden for so long that were about to roar. Celia Monroe walked into the lobby of Rosehill City Hall, her back straight and her face expressionless. The light from the antique chandeliers reflected off her glasses, making it impossible to see the look in her eyes. But anyone who knew Celia, who had been in her class, who had heard her speak at memorials for George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, could tell one thing: she was ready to fight. Her assistant, Andre, was waiting. His eyes widened at the sight of her slightly swollen face, the bruise on her cheek, and the strand of hair that had fallen loosely over her face. "Oh my God. What did they do to you?" Celia didn't answer. She just said, "Call the press room tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock. All the local press. And Rachel." Rachel, Celia's eldest daughter, was also the city's attorney general. A sharp, fierce woman who had never shed a tear at a hearing. But when she arrived a few hours later, saw her mother sitting quietly in her office, her eyes slightly swollen, her shoulders streaked with dust. She paused in the doorway. "Mom?" she said softly. "No need to ask," Celia interrupted. "It's not personal, it's city business." Rachel didn't hug her mother. She walked over, sat down next to her, like two lawyers preparing for a big lawsuit. Before dawn, the next day, Celia's image was everywhere. A short video from a nearby resident went viral like wildfire. Celia was shoved against a wall, her hands cuffed. Officer Mason looming over her, the gasps in the crowd, her voice cracking. "You'll regret this." And then the click of the handcuffs being released, the panicked change in attitude as the officer realized he'd just hit the mayor. Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram. All of them were awash with hashtags. "Justice for Celia. Mayor assaulted." This. Our mayor. Mashed Rosehill. Reckoning. The regional press began to pick up Atlanta TV, sent special crews to Rosehill. Local radio spent the morning talking. Older people called in expressing shock. Young college students were angry. Church leaders were pensive, but they all agreed on one thing. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a truth that had been swept under the rug for too long. 10 a.m. Hundreds of people were waiting in front of City Hall. Some carried handwritten signs. "We see you. A punch to you is a punch to all. No more silence." Celia Monroe walked out of the building with Rachel on her right and Andre on her left. The crowd fell silent. People waited for an explanation. A reaction. A voice. She had no notes, no assistant whispering in her ear, no looking at the teleprompter, because this story had no need to be rehearsed. It was lived on her cheeks, on her hands, on every breath she held as she was pushed and shoved. She stood before the microphone, adjusting her glasses. Her voice rang out deep, steady, unwavering. "I didn't mean to say anything. At first I thought I would handle this quietly, like so many of us have to. But then I looked at my face in the mirror. I looked into my daughter's eyes, and I saw the anger she was trying to swallow. I couldn't keep quiet. A breeze blew, turning a page of silver hair by her ear. Last night I was just standing there, on a public sidewalk, waiting for an assistant to bring me a book. For that, I was suspected, I was questioned. I was pushed against a wall, handcuffed, punched in the face. Not because I fought back, not because I caused trouble, but because I existed. At the right time, with the wrong skin color, the whispers spread like waves. I am the mayor of Rose Hill. But last night, that didn't matter. Because my name, my title, even the policies I fought for in this community, all disappeared before the judgmental gaze of someone who didn't want to see me as a person. Not Mayor Monroe, but a black woman standing in the night. Rachel tightened her grip on the edge of the podium. Andre bowed his head. Many in the crowd were tearful. I'm not speaking out of revenge. I'm speaking out because it's time to stop. Stop the cycle in which people of color, women, men, young people, old people are made into suspects simply for showing up. She paused for a second. Then she said clearly, "I've filed a formal complaint, but it doesn't stop there. I'm calling for the immediate termination of Officer Gregory Mason. I'm calling for a public investigation, and I'm calling for an independent Citizens Oversight Commission because the system can't investigate itself." The applause broke out not loud, but solid, like the heartbeat of a city that had just been reactivated. I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking to be treated equally like any citizen in this city. No matter where they live, what they wear, what time of day they stand on the sidewalk. Then Celia stepped back from the microphone. No lingering, no answering reporters. What she said was the truth, and the truth needed no editing. In the mayor's office, a ripple had begun to spread. The phones rang non-stop. Journalists called civil rights groups, sent messages of support. Community leaders called for meetings. Police officials were silent. No apology, no press release, no comment from the Rose Hill Police Department. But Celia had expected it. She looked at Rachel and said, "They'll wait for the calm. But this time, it won't be calm." By 5 a.m., Rose Hill was no longer a sleeping town. Social media woke it up before the first church bell. Celia Monroe didn't have a TikTok account, but she was trending on the platform within hours. The 21-second clip, which captured the punch, the sound of handcuffs, and her face had already been viewed more than 1 million times, shared at an uncontrollable pace. Somewhere amid the angry and outraged comments, a short sentence was pinned to the top by an anonymous user. "If the mayor gets beaten like that, what happens to the nameless?" That question no one could answer, but it echoed throughout Rose Hill from the corner coffee shop to the chambers of state lawmakers. The hashtags continued to rise like a flood. Celia Monroe. This is our mayor, Justice. In Rose Hill, black women deserve respect. Her daughter Rachel was the first to enter the office early that morning. No greetings, no tears, just one sentence. "I've called the federal attorney. They're monitoring the situation." Andre was on his phone, taking down every call, every email, every reporter begging for a statement. Meanwhile, Celia sat at her desk, her eyes fixed on an old photo she and her mother in 1969 at a Black voting rights march. Her mother had said at the time, "Never let your silence be interpreted as complicity." None. A.M., 3 minutes before the press conference. Nearly 300 people had gathered in the lobby. The state media had arrived. CNN sent reporters. NPR was there. A European station was live streaming in French. But Celia didn't see the crowd as an audience. She saw them as witnesses. Not witnesses to a transgression, but to a moment of transformation. Rachel adjusted the hem of her mother's coat. "Are you sure?" Celia nodded. "If you're asking, it means you're alive. So there's still work to be done." 10 o'clock sharp. She stepped out and the crowd held its breath. No background music. No media crew adjusting the lights. Just the wind blowing through her coat and a low murmur in the absolute silence. Her voice rose. It didn't need a microphone to be hushed. "Last night I was insulted. Assaulted, considered a threat, not because of my actions, but because of my existence." Her eyes scanned the crowd. No rancor, no call for revenge, only the truth. "When a police officer doesn't know my name, my title, why I'm standing there, and still feels he has the right to hit me, the problem isn't me. The problem is the system that allows him to think that way." The woman in the front row. A Latina paramedic sheds tears. A high school student scribbles notes furiously. A white veteran stands at attention, his hand on his chest. Celia doesn't cry. She doesn't shake. But for a brief moment, her eyes linger on the lens of a young reporter live streaming. That gaze, deep, dark, determined, seems to look out at the millions watching on the screen and asks, "Did you see that? And now, what are you going to do?" She continued, each word hammered into stone. "Today I do not speak only as someone who has been beaten. I speak as a mayor, a mother, a citizen, and a Black woman who is tired of bowing down and being beaten. I will not apologize for standing up. I will not be silent, because someone is uncomfortable with the truth." She announced the formation of an independent legal team. She called for a full investigation into the Rose Hill Police Department's history of internal complaints. She demanded the immediate suspension of Officer Mason. And finally, a referendum on civilian oversight of the police. After the press conference, there were things that were not captured on television. A 9-year-old boy ran up to her and tugged on her shirt. "Are you a superhero?" A grandpa grabbed her hand and said, "It's been a long time since I've seen someone who's not afraid of anyone." A young officer stood at the edge of the crowd, not in uniform, bowing to her. He said nothing, but she understood. Back in the office, Rachel slumped into her chair. Andre whispered, "You've created something bigger than anyone in Rose Hill has ever seen." Celia looked out the window. Below was the square where she had spoken. The people had not left. They stood there talking, connecting, exchanging phone numbers. They were awake. She breathed slowly. Not because she was tired, but because she knew. The real war had only just begun. That night, Rose Hill slept late. Celia Monroe sat alone in her office. The soft yellow light reflected off the ceiling, the clock ticking steadily in the strangely quiet room. The screen of her phone lit up with notifications, texts, emails, reporters, political allies, a few old acquaintances. She didn't read it. Not now. Not when her mind was drifting back to the years she thought she had left behind. Outside the glass door, the town square was almost empty. Only a few people were cleaning up. A late-night hot dog cart was pushing slowly. But inside, Celia, another parade was taking place. In memories, she remembered her mother, Evelyn Monroe, a woman born into the darkness of Jim Crow, but never let that darkness swallow her voice. She was a former elementary school teacher, but her voice when she addressed the Board of Education was like someone who had just stepped out of a movement. Strong, clear, unfettered. She had taken Celia to the Birmingham March in 1963. Celia was only 6, but the memory was seared into her every cell. The tear gas from the grenades, the growling dogs, and her mother's shaking arm squeezing her daughter's shoulder. They didn't talk much about that day later, but in her mother's eyes, Celia learned something. Not everyone survives telling the truth, but the truth always survives. When Celia was 19, she was pulled over while carrying her books back to her dorm. Two white police officers asked her to open the trunk for no reason. They pointed flashlights at her, laughed, and asked a question she would never forget. "Are you a good student? Are you going to be a lawyer? Or are you just trying to play the intellectual game?" She laughed. Not because she thought it was funny, but because she knew if she cried, they would enjoy it. That night, she wrote in her diary, "I didn't cry, but I bowed my head for the last time." And then, when she became Rose Hill's first human rights lawyer, she learned another lesson. Silence can be a weapon of survival. Once she represented a black teenager who had been beaten by police in an interrogation room. The case was lack of evidence. She spoke up. And 3 days later, her car was painted red. "Traitor." Celia washed it quietly. No press, no lawsuit. Her husband at the time, a history teacher, looked at her and said, "You didn't lose, you just weren't ready to win." Back in the present, Celia closed her eyes. Her hand went to her cheek, where the bruise was still faint, but it didn't hurt. The pain was elsewhere, the years she had spent teaching her daughter to be quiet, to stay safe. The times she told students to dress modestly to avoid misunderstandings. The moments when she refused to answer reporters for fear of losing money for the school. She used to choose silence for the common good. But last night, when her head hit the wall, when her hands were locked in handcuffs, when blood flowed from her lips, she realized the price of silence was no longer acceptable. If I, with all my titles, degrees, reputation, can be beaten just for standing in the wrong place, what can I teach anyone? Celia stood up, left her desk. She opened an old filing cabinet. From the bottom drawer, she pulled out a small wooden box. Inside were handwritten letters, old newspaper articles, black and white photos. A letter from John Lewis sent to her in 1998. "Don't stop fighting. When a black woman stands up, the truth stands with you." A photo of her and her mother in Alabama, where Evelyn was slapped for entering a non-black restaurant. A small article in the local paper in 2005. Lawyer Monroe, the woman whose voice no one dared interrupt. She looked at them all and whispered, "Now I understand all that silence was for this moment." The phone rang. "Rachel, Mom. Are you still there?" Celia. "Yeah. Can't sleep." "Me too. The news is all over the internet. People are sharing videos non-stop. People are texting me, asking what I need." Celia smiled. "I need you guys not to leave. When the anger subsides, I need them to still be there." There was a pause on the phone. Then Rachel whispered, "I'm not alone." Celia put the phone down. She stood in front of the glass door. The city was silent, but she knew. Beneath the silence, something was changing. This time she would not bow her head. This time the truth would not come alone. She turned away from the files that littered her desk and walked toward the antique wooden chair next to her personal bookshelf. She sat down slowly, her hands clasped together like someone preparing to make a confession, not to others, but to herself. In the silence, a voice echoed in her memory, the voice of her mother, Evelyn Monroe. "The more you study, the more they check your roots. Don't let knowledge make you forget your color. They never forget." The memory played back like an 8mm film. Celia, 5 years old, sitting on her mother's lap, her arms wrapped around the cover of an old Bible. Her mother didn't tell fairy tales. She told stories about Emmett Till, about Rosa Parks, about Martin Luther King, and the marches she had quietly participated in. Evelyn had never been a prominent activist, but in each lullaby she had planted in Celia the seed of not being silent. "You don't have to scream to scare people," my mother used to say. "Just stand still without bowing your head." Celia sighed. Not a tired sigh, but a sigh for the past. as if she were blowing the dust off a memory that had been blurred by time. She remembered 1974, entering law school at Howard University, the only black student in the criminal studies group, being questioned not for giving the wrong answer, but for daring to answer. She remembered the look in a white professor's eyes as she said, "I don't think I need to soothe white people's feelings when I analyze American legal history." He didn't argue, but her grades were never above average. And she remembered, on the night of her graduation, her father, a railroad worker, standing in the shadows of the hall, not stepping forward to take a picture, because he didn't want to disrupt the pure white frame of the others posing with his daughter. "I'm proud of you," he said later, "but don't let them think I don't know my place." Celia cried that day, quietly alone, in the second-floor girls' bathroom of the school. Not because she was sad, but because she understood the price of presence. The wind outside howled. A piece of paper on the desk was blown, spun, and fell at her feet. Celia bent down to pick it up. It was a copy of the early morning news mayor attacked by police in downtown. That headline, she saw it clearly, was not just about her. It was an indictment of all those who had been pushed, doubted, asked, "What are you doing here for, daring to exist in a space not meant for them?" Celia stood up and walked to an old filing cabinet in the corner. From a secret compartment, she pulled out a small wooden box. Inside were things that no one in the office knew she had. A train ticket from Selma, Alabama, where she had traveled with her mother in 1965, a leather notebook where she had recorded every police brutality case she had defended, a faded fax from 1992, a letter from a mother whose son had been wrongly imprisoned for riding a bicycle without a light. An old envelope inside was a handwritten letter from a former cop, who had denounced his comrades but was reassigned to the administrative division forever. Celia didn't keep them for nostalgia's sake. She kept them as a flame, something she couldn't forget if she wanted to move on. The phone rang softly. It wasn't an alarm, just a text from Rachel. "I can't sleep. I don't think you can either. I just want to say whatever you do tomorrow, whatever you say. You have a whole generation behind you. Don't be afraid." Celia smiled, not in comfort, but in confirmation. No one asked her to be quiet anymore, and this time she didn't apologize for speaking up. She turned back to her desk and opened her laptop. On the screen, a draft of the Rose Hill Civil Oversight Initiative appeared. It wasn't finished, but each line was like a heartbeat, steady, steady, and real. Celia typed another line. "No one, no title, or no title has the right to trample on human dignity in the name of security." She sat there in the warm yellow light of her office, amid her memories and her drafts of policy, and she knew tonight she wasn't alone. Because for the first time in decades, it was her voice, small but unwavering, that had silenced the city and made it listen. The morning after Celia wrote the draft of her reform policy, the gates of power in Rose Hill began to shake. The phone in the mayor's office rang incessantly. 3 secretaries answered in turn. Most were from the press. The rest were unfamiliar calls, some from anonymous numbers. The messages were mostly supportive, but familiar voices were beginning to emerge. "Don't mess with the law enforcement. You're sowing division. If you keep this up, don't blame us when the city gets out of control." There were no direct threats, but the implications were as clear as fresh blood. Elsewhere, the Rose Hill Police Department headquarters building, an urgent internal meeting was taking place, headed by Deputy Chief Monica Hayes, the only black woman in senior leadership, and a person Celia Monroe had personally appointed to the position 2 years earlier. Monica sat silently at the head of the table. Before her sat the captains, the commanders, the chiefs of the investigation department, mostly white men, some of them sitting with their arms crossed, some of them glancing at each other as if waiting for the first person to fire. In the middle of the room sat the president of the police union, Thomas Recker, tall, his voice echoing like boots on the concrete hallway. "Mayor Monroe just declared war on the entire force," he said, gritting his teeth. "I just got over 40 text messages from my brothers in the force, asking why the higher-ups didn't speak up to defend Officer Mason." A captain chimed in. If she releases the civilian reform, you'll see it as treason." Monica remained silent. She looked at each of them. She didn't need to ask who in the room had seen the video. She knew they had. And she knew too. No one dared to speak the truth. They saw it was wrong, but chose not to confront it. Finally, Monica spoke up, her voice low but resonant. "I'm not here to defend a reputation. I'm here to defend right and wrong." No response. She continued. Officer Mason acted against procedure, against ethics, and worse, he beat a woman he didn't even know just because she was in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong skin color. For the first time, someone looked down at the table. Someone clenched their fists. Someone sneered. Thomas Recker sneered. "So you're on the side of the mob? Fine. But don't expect this force to follow you," Monica replied calmly. "I don't need them to follow me. I need them to follow the law." At the same time, in City Hall, Celia Monroe was preparing for a meeting with the city council. The room was large, with high glass microphones placed at every chair. Her daughter Rachel entered first, carrying the final copy of the Monroe Resolution, a proposed policy overhaul of the police oversight system that included 3 goals: establish an independent citizens oversight board with access to complaint files, require retraining on emotional control, racial bias and civil rights for the entire force, implement a transparent public reporting system that would allow citizens to monitor the progress of complaints. Celia knew there would be a backlash, but she didn't expect even her old allies to begin to falter. As the meeting began, several council members who had supported her during her campaign avoided her gaze. As she presented the resolution, some glanced at their watches. Others texted under the table. A white commissioner named Graham Morton, a former high school teacher, raised his hand. "Mayor, no one is against transparency. But is this the right time? The police are tense. The unions are angry. Are we being too aggressive?" Celia looked him straight in the eye. "I'm being aggressive when I react. And violence and insults are considered order. I'm sorry, Mr. Morton, but if this isn't the time, when will it be? After the second incident? Or when the victim isn't me, but a child?" The room fell silent. A young commissioner of Haitian descent named Nadia St. James nodded. She was the first after Celia to speak in support. "I've seen the video. And if we're going to find excuses to slow down, then we don't deserve to be in this room." Celia's eyes met Nadia's. They didn't need to say anything. Same fire, same generation 2 decades apart, but the same stubborn blood. That evening, the police union press conference took place at a grand hotel on the edge of town. On the podium was Thomas Recker, who spoke with a stony face. "Mayor Monroe is making the police the enemy. We are not against reform, but we are against turning people away from those who are on the front lines." Behind him were dozens of officers, cold-faced in their uniforms. None were women. None were people of color. "If Rose Hill continues down this path," Thomas continued, "we will consider legal action, including a full strike." The news was instantly splashed across the media. On one side was the city's first black mayor, the victim of a public assault. On the other side were the vigilantes calling for them to stop supporting the government if they were not protected. And in the middle was the people for the first time forced to choose justice or stability, real voice or false silence. Celia watched the entire press conference from her office, saying nothing. When it ended, Rachel asked, "They're pushing you to the edge if they really strike." Celia replied without hesitation. "Then you'll be standing alone like you were." And she knew from here on there would be no turning back. The morning after the press conference that shook Rose Hill, the mood at City Hall had changed. No one said it, but Celia Monroe knew her. Every move was met with whispers. Not because they suspected she was lying, but because they feared she was telling the truth. And the truth, as always, was not easy to swallow in a city accustomed to keeping the peace by ignoring the pain. Her office was a bustling war room. Rachel was giving constant updates. Andre was devising a communications strategy for the backlash from the police union. But Celia remained calm, not because she wasn't worried, but because she had gone too far to turn back. The Rose Hill Police Department, now a fortress under siege, not by enemies, but by the public. Some officers had begun refusing to wear body cams. Some were delaying responding to calls from black neighborhoods. And most importantly, a split was brewing within the organization. Deputy Chief Monica Hayes stood in front of a stack of internal memos, analyzing the response data of her team over the past 48 hours. She knew what was happening blue flu, a phenomenon in which officers feign illness in order to secretly protest the administration. A young officer walked in. Deputy Chief, the police union is calling an emergency meeting in 15 minutes. Subject, response to reform order. No one from the board of directors invited. Monica took a deep breath. The truth was starting to sink in. The battle was no longer between one person. It was between two understandings of power. Meanwhile, Celia Monroe was preparing for an internal hearing at the city council. The goal to present the full text of the Monroe Resolution, a set of sweeping, straightforward reform proposals, but when she entered the meeting room, the atmosphere was not what she had expected. Some of the commissioners who had supported her during the campaign, the ones who had patted her on the back and called her a breath of fresh air, looked down at their papers today. More empty seats than usual, and one with a microphone deliberately removed. A sign. A message. A veiled challenge. She began to speak. Her voice was calm, sharp. One item after another flashed across the screen. Independent Citizens Oversight Commission, with access to records public hearings. Retraining the entire force, focusing on emotional control. Eliminating unconscious bias. Reinventing civil rights. A public dashboard where citizens could track the progress of complaints, making each step of the response transparent. She spoke not too loudly, but clearly. Each word was a needle piercing the shell that the city government had wrapped around law enforcement for decades. Then came the questioning. Councilman Graham Morton White, and with a silver beard, spoke first. He had been a history teacher, had donated to Celia's campaign, and had called her a source of pride for the community. Mayor, he began. I understand what you mean. But do you realize that pushing for reform now could cause the police to lose confidence in their city leaders? Celia tilted her head. I'm not asking them to trust me. I'm asking them to follow the law. Another councilman chimed in. There are people who are saying you're anti-police. What do you think about that? She didn't blink. If following the law is anti-police, then perhaps we should reconsider the definition of the word police. Outside the building, flyers had appeared at the gate. A small group of former officers were handing out flyers. Politics should not undermine order. Support Officer Mason. Monroe must resign to save Rose Hill. Celia walked past them as she left the conference room. No one dared to meet her eyes. That evening at a hotel a few miles from downtown, the Rose Hill Police Union held a press conference. Thomas Recker, the union president, stepped up to the podium, standing in a row of uniformed officers. We who protect Rose Hill are under attack by the very people who lead this city. He brandished a file, a petition from more than 120 officers demanding the suspension of the Monroe Resolution and a public apology from the mayor. If the administration continues on its current course, he said, we will not keep anyone safe, not even the mayor. It was no longer a protest. It was a threat. Back in the office, Celia sat across from Rachel and Andre. No one spoke for a few minutes. The news flashed across the screen. Mayor Monroe versus police. Rachel slammed a notebook on the table. I can't let them turn the story around. We have to fight back. We have to have video documents, witnesses. We have to have a strategy. Andre spoke more slowly, or you can step back a little. Hold off. Get some time to prepare. Celia looked at them both. Then softly, but firmly. If you step back, who will step forward? She stood up. Her eyes turned to the glass doors. The city at night was sparkling, but no longer peaceful. It was never peaceful. It was just that we had closed our eyes to not see it. They don't fear the law. They fear someone forcing them to obey. And this time, she was the one forcing, not with anger, but with will. That evening, Rose Hill's central square was lit by makeshift string lights, strung between old lampposts. There was no stage, No massive sound system, just a low wooden platform, a few microphones, and hundreds of plastic chairs placed close together. On each chair was a piece of white paper printed with the words, "This is not my forum. This is ours." On the steps of the town hall, Celia Monroe stood watching the square fill up. Old people with canes, young men with backpacks, women with small children, some who had once bowed their heads in silence under the scrutiny of the police, now walked into the square with their heads held high, as if for the first time they felt this place was theirs. Rachel whispered. "We weren't sure they would come, but they did." Celia just nodded, her eyes still on the crowd. She knew this was a more important moment than any session. The microphone squeaked. The square fell silent. Celia stepped up to the podium, not holding a paper, not looking at the projection screen, just holding the microphone, as if holding a thread between herself and the people before her. "I didn't come here tonight to speak," she began, her voice low and steady. "I came here to listen, to hear each person, whether angry, hurt, skeptical, or hopeful." A small round of applause rose from the back of the square, then spread. "I know you've heard enough promises. It's exhausting, but there's something I need to say, and I need you to remember. I don't stand here tonight as a mayor. I stand here as someone who has been pushed against a wall, handcuffed, beaten, because I don't look like someone they think deserves respect." The square fell silent. She continued, her eyes scanning the crowd. "And if it can happen to me, you know how many people it has happened to that no one saw, no one videotaped, no one said anything." Celia took a step back. She looked down at the audience. "Who among you has ever been asked for identification when you were doing the right thing? Who has ever been followed in a store because of the color of your skin? Who has ever been told to lower your voice so you could be heard?" Hands shot up, dozens, then hundreds. "I'm not here to complain. I'm here to remind you that our pain has a name, a presence, and a right to justice." A man stood up, old shirt, hoarse voice. "Ms. Monroe, if you weren't the mayor that day, would anyone believe you?" Celia did not shy away. "I have wondered that, and it pains me to say, probably not. But because of that, I cannot remain silent, because I think of those who have no title, no microphone, no one to listen. If I do not use this voice to protect them, what is the meaning of this title?" A young brown-skinned girl with curly hair stood up. She was about 17 years old. Her eyes were watery, but her gaze was determined. "Do you think we can change anything when we are told we are too young to understand every time we speak up?" Celia nodded slowly. "Because I am young, I see things more clearly than adults. Adults are so used to injustice that they call it stability. But I have eyes that have not been worn out, and a voice that has not been muffled. I do not have to wait until I grow up to demand what is right." The town hall lasted nearly 2 hours. No one left halfway. People told of their children being questioned without reason, of complaints that went unanswered, of being afraid to call 911. Not because they were afraid of criminals, but because they feared that rescuers would mistake them for criminals. Celia didn't promise much. She said only one thing. "I made a proposal for reform. They said I should withdraw it. I didn't. They said I wouldn't be protected. I didn't ask for protection. But if you stand with me after today, for the first time in years, I won't be fighting alone." When she stepped off the podium, there was no cheering, no music. But each eye that looked at her lit up quietly, firmly, like stones being placed to build a new foundation. Rachel ran up to her and took her hand. "You're no longer alone. You're the fire. But everyone else is the wood." On the way home, Celia checked her phone. More than 600 messages were unread, but one name stood out. Monica Hayes. The message contained only one line. "I just got a letter from 3 officers. They want to testify about Mason's misconduct. I think we're at a turning point." Celia looked up at the night sky stars twinkling in the darkness. For the first time in days, she smiled. Not because things were okay, but because the war was shifting, from fear to hope. Monday morning in the administration building, the sky was as gray as a political storm. Celia Monroe walked into the hearing room without her bodyguards, without her team of advisors, just Rachel and Deputy Chief Monica Hayes. She was dressed in a dark blazer, not too formal, but with the air of someone who didn't need to act strong to be seen as strong. The internal hearing room wasn't large, but it had everything. A serious confrontation. Needed a long table, the disciplinary board members in suits, including the city attorney, and across the table, Gregory Mason, the man who a few weeks ago had pushed her against the wall, like an unknown suspect in the middle of the night. No one greeted Celia, not out of disrespect, but because everyone could feel the weight she carried. Mason looked different that day. No longer arrogant. No longer. The uniform had been replaced by a white shirt, a loose tie, and sunken eyes. But Celia didn't feel any better. On the contrary, his hunched posture made it clear. He wasn't remorseful. He was just afraid for himself. The chairman of the disciplinary committee spoke up. "We have called this hearing to consider whether Officer Gregory Mason violated our internal policies, including the use of inappropriate force discrimination and failure to follow police procedures." Mason's lawyer began his defense. The arguments were nothing new. Late at night, stranger in front of a closed store, failure to provide ID, feeling threatened. The words were all too familiar, like a script that was replayed over and over again after each incident. When Celia's turn came to speak, the room held its breath. She didn't stand up right away. She opened the file, slowly taking out 2 photos. One was of her pinned against a wall, handcuffed, her face bruised. The other was from Town Hall, arms raised in the middle of the square. "I'm not here to rehash my pain," she began, her voice even and clear. "I'm here to show you the truth. I wasn't beaten because I was mayor. I was beaten because I wasn't seen as a human being." Mason glared, but Celia didn't look at him. "I told him I was waiting for someone. I said I didn't do anything wrong, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that he had a story in mind, and I was just an unwilling actor in that script." She opened the second file, 3 affidavits from former victims who had complained about Mason, but had been dismissed for lack of evidence. "We've let him carry a gun and a badge for too long. Not because he's right, but because those victims have no title." The chairman asked, "Ms. Monroe, what action do you want the board to take?" Celia looked at everyone. "I'm not asking, I'm demanding. Suspend Officer Mason immediately, open a full investigation into the previous complaints against him, and send a clear message. At Rose Hill, no one, no matter in uniform or name tag, has the right to strip another person of their dignity and then wash their hands of it." When she sat down, no one said anything, but the atmosphere in the room had changed. This was no longer a technical session. This was a moral trial, where everyone was forced to look at themselves. The board called a 1-hour recess for deliberation. Celia stepped out into the hallway, Rachel beside her, squeezing her hand. "You've turned this hearing into an oath." An hour later, they were called back. The chairman of the board read the verdict. "After reviewing the evidence testimony and video footage, we have determined that Officer Gregory Mason committed serious violations of the Code of Conduct, use of force, and discrimination. We recommend immediate termination and referral to an independent investigation." A sigh rang out, not of disappointment, but of belated relief. Gregory Mason stood up. Didn't say anything. Didn't apologize. Just trudged toward the door. But as he passed Celia, he paused for a moment. "You ruined my career," he hissed through gritted teeth. Celia looked straight at him. Not angry, not shaken. "No, you did it. I was just a witness." Outside, Monica Hayes waited. She said nothing, just nodded. Her eyes conveyed an unspoken message. A victory has been won, but the campaign is long. The news of Officer Gregory Mason's dismissal spread faster than any official statement. On television, from the corner of local stations to prime-time national channels, Rose Hill was being talked about as the next flashpoint in a nationwide police reform movement. And at its center, a 52-year-old black woman, standing tall in the storm, Celia Monroe. But no wave is quiet. Within hours of the disciplinary board's conclusion, the Rose Hill Police Union launched a fierce counterattack. A petition appeared online, calling for a vote of no confidence in Mayor Monroe, garnering thousands of signatures in 24 hours. A media campaign was launched, local radio ads, billboards along the freeway that read, "When crime is high, who's going to protect you not, Ms. Monroe?" At closed-door meetings in City Hall, some council members began to openly doubt. Those who had stood with Celia now hesitated, trying to avoid the cameras. One councillor, Barrow, who was backed by the union, spoke bluntly. "We cannot allow one individual, no matter how touching his story, to fracture the relationship between government and law enforcement." Celia sat at the head table, her back straight, her eyes straight, her brow unwrinkled. "And we cannot allow the badge to become a shield for injustice," she replied, her voice even and unwavering. "I do not want a traitor in uniform protecting my family." Then came the personal blow. A grainy video was posted on social media. Celia, 20 years ago, was participating in a stop-and-frisk protest in another city. In the video, she was confronting the police, shouting slogans. Context was cut, but enough for the naysayers to make headlines. Mayor Monroe has a history of fighting cops. Here's the facts. Conservative channels began to dig in, a commentator said. "Is this the mayor or a radical activist in a politician's disguise?" Rachel showed the video to Celia near midnight. She just stared. Not angry, not in denial. "I'm not ashamed of it," she said. "I was there because no one else was, and I'd do it again." But the price wasn't just publicity. Celia received her first anonymous letter. A piece of paper with the words, "Watch your step. Rose Hill is ours." Her personal car was graffitied in black paint. Traitor. One night someone threw a rock and broke the window of Rachel's office. An emergency meeting was called that night. Andre said, his voice low and tired. "They want you to be afraid. They want you to sit back and wait for chaos to consume this term." Rachel interjected. "We can slow down. Withdraw some proposals. Calm things down. At least temporarily." Celia looked at them both. Her eyes were red but bright like embers stirred by the wind. "If we withdraw, we're teaching the next generation the wrong lesson. That being right will lose if being right causes trouble. No, if I have to stand alone, I will, but I will not retreat one step." The next day, Celia called an outdoor press conference right in Town Hall Square, the very place where not long ago she had said, "I do not fight alone." She did not read from a note. She spoke from memory and from her heart. "I know some people are angry. I know some people are afraid of change. But a peace built on closing your eyes is not peace. It is surrender. And I was not born to surrender." When it ended, there was no applause. But hundreds of people stood there staring. They had not come to cheer. They had come to witness a woman who would not back down when every force told her to stop. An 11-year-old boy came forward and handed her a folded piece of paper. "My mother said you were the first person to say what we thought." Celia unfolded the paper. There were only 3 words scrawled in pencil. "Don't stop talking." It was a Wednesday afternoon. Rose Hill was still. The sky was a gray, as if holding its breath. Inside City Hall, the council chamber was packed. Not a seat was empty. People lined up outside the door, some with children in tow, others with handwritten signs. "We have not forgotten. We see you. Justice is real when you demand it." Celia Monroe did not sit in the main chair as usual. Today she stood behind the podium like a regular citizen, because as she had told Rachel earlier, you don't have to stand tall to be heard, just stand tall. On the table was a proposal for reform, the Monroe Reform Package. The package consisted of 3 parts. Establish an independent civilian oversight commission with access to internal records and hearings. Mandatory anti-bias and de-escalation training for the entire police force every year. The Internal Disciplinary Inquiry Board was made public, allowing citizens to track the status of their complaints in real time. An hour of tense hearings passed. Some council members tried to stall with circumlocutions. Some read prepared statements, their voices shaking. But Celia was unmoved. Not because she was used to confrontation, but because she was no longer afraid of being alone. Finally, the council president announced, "We will take a vote. Those who agree with the Monroe Reform Package, raise your hand." One hand went up. Then 2. then 5, then all except 1. The vote 8-1. The chamber erupted, not in loud cheers but in quiet sobs, the applause breaking into rhythms of conviction. An old woman at the back wiped away tears with a handkerchief. A teenager raised his fist to the sky as if to punch an injustice that had been silent for too long. Rachel rushed to hug her mother. No words, just a squeeze. Elijah smiled, tears falling. Andre stood still, gripping his chair, then nodded. After the meeting, Celia stepped onto the balcony of City Hall. Hundreds of people were still waiting below. She didn't use a microphone. She just raised her hand for silence. And in a loud voice she said, "I'm not here today because I'm stronger. I'm here because I won't back down. And now I know I'm not the only one." That evening, local television aired the clip, millions of shares. Other cities began sending in requests for a reform package. Mayors called to ask Celia how to build trust after the crisis. But she refused to go on talk shows, no CNN, no book deal. She stayed in Rose Hill. "I don't want to be interviewed," she told Rachel. "I want to be asked, what are we going to do next today?" A month later, the first Civilian Oversight Committee convened its inaugural session. 11 people, a mechanic, an elementary school teacher, a student, a nurse, and even a man who had been wrongly arrested by Mason in 2018. None wore suits, but each brought something more important than power experience. A year later, the rate of internal complaints had dropped by 38%. The rate of police community interactions had increased. Trust did not return immediately, but it was no longer buried. One fall afternoon, Celia visited East High School. The students crowded around, no longer shy as before. One asked, "Do you think you can change the system?" Celia chuckled. "No, but you dared to stare at it without blinking." And then the whole city watched. That evening, Celia went home, turned on the kitchen light, and poured herself a cup of tea. On the table was the "We Are Not Alone" file. Now too full to close, she opened the last page. She pasted a new piece of paper on it with just 3 words. "We won." You just heard the story of Celia Monroe, a woman handcuffed in the middle of the night face first into a wall for simply standing still on the sidewalk of the city she leads. Let that sink in for a second. A mayor, someone who took an oath to protect her community, who attended the funerals of fallen heroes, who helped shape a generation of young people, was treated like a faceless suspect simply because of the color of her skin. What if she wasn't the mayor? What if there weren't cameras that night? What if there weren't witnesses? Celia Monroe would probably be a forgotten name in the police department's under-investigation files today. And that's what makes us angry. Outrage not just for a single officer who committed a crime, it's for a system that allowed that crime to continue, to cover it up, to gloss it over, to turn its back on the truth until it couldn't be hidden anymore. But this isn't just Celia's story. It's the story of thousands of invisible people who every day choose to keep their heads down to stay safe. Every walk home, every drive through an intersection, every time they stand in front of a store, it's a gamble with fate. So what's the lesson here? We can't wait for the mayor to be the victim before we get angry. We can't wait for video to show us. We can't wait for injustice to knock on our door before we speak up. The lesson is ask questions. Dare to doubt. Stand by the truth, even when it's inconvenient. And if you're listening to this story on your phone, on your laptop, in your safe place, know that our silence is a choice. And sometimes it's the cruelest choice. Like if you believe Celia Monroe deserves to be protected not because of her title, but because she is a person. Leave a comment below. What do you think? Have you ever witnessed injustice? We read it all. And if you want to continue hearing stories of courage, untold truths, and journeys to confront injustice, don't forget to subscribe, because justice doesn't come by itself. It comes when someone stands up, just like Celia did. The question now is, will you stand with her?